Alright, juniors, it has been a long time. Welcome back to the glorious land of the internet, which I'm sure you haven't used at all. Alright, looking at 1950s, the good old 50s America. It's a time of great prosperity, though the next video will look at some of the bad stuff about prosperity in the 50s America, namely racism, but we will get into that next video. This video, though, many good things were going on in the United States in the 50s. One of the reasons there's good things going on is there's great economic growth. Now, we know that we had the Great Depression. If you look at this graph here, right after the 1925, on the bottom, you see this great drop in growth of the gross domestic product, which is all the money the United States is generating. And shortly, during and after World War II, you see this massive spike in the growth of the economy. And that's really all due to the war. You have people working, producing guns and weapons and all the other things that are supporting the war effort. It gets people back to work and ends the Great Depression. And this growth continues after the war ends. Especially Europe's economy is difficult, so the United States is able to step in and provide a great deal of goods and other things. So we have this fantastic, one of the greatest times of growth in the history of the United States. If you look continually as it goes on, it kind of evens out. So economic growth is going well. There's also a baby boom. So you have, especially as soldiers return from war, people are now willing to have children. During the Great Depression, people didn't want to have kids and raise them in this environment where they don't have enough money barely to support themselves. So there's a great growth of, you have lots of children being born in the late 40s and early 50s. And with all this, then the American culture changes. But before we get into a bit of the culture, in response to all this prosperity and money and jobs, of course politics need to weigh in on. And the president at this time is good old Harry S. Truman, who comes into office after the death of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And Truman really wants to continue and really make sure that this prosperity the country is experiencing continues. So, in his State of the Union address, 1949, he gives what's called his Fair Deal speech. And it's a lot of very ambitious ideas, many of which end up actually not being accomplished in their entirety. But he really wants to continue and make sure that American prosperity is going to happen. He wants to improve education, he wants to have universal health care, and he wants to make sure that when it comes to employment and protection for unions, unions are protected, and people are able to join unions whenever they want. And while education, certainly some money is going toward it, and we'll talk about education a bit, how it's definitely improving. And universal health care doesn't particularly happen overall. There is an extension of Social Security and some other protections for people out of work, which is good. Currently, we're still debating universal health care, so this is 1949. Now we're looking at Obamacare. One of the biggest problems that people have, or especially a lot of businesses, is this idea about unions. So the unions, during World War II, they agreed not to go on strike. They said the war effort is so important that we are going to agree not to strike, to not walk out of factories, because we need to make sure our soldiers are protected and we can end this war quickly. However, after the war is over, unions are now saying, well, now we want to get wages increased for our workers, and just a number of other efforts just to protect their union members. And around 25% of the country after World War II is in a union. So there's an act, it's called Taft-Hartley Act, which was passed to limit unions. And a lot of people are opposed to this, namely workers, but businesses and anyone that's really involved in making a lot of money, they are not as particularly favorable about unions because it loses them money. So while Truman says, I'm going to stop this act, he wants to protect unions, he ends up actually not doing that, and it allows the government to intercede and kind of resolve some issues with labor that it shouldn't, or as Truman wanted to. So Taft-Hartley Act, it is still around to this day, and it's a device that's used to limit the effect of unions and the effect that it can influence, especially production and the economy. However, this American dream, all this money that's being generated, which is still a lot, even if unions aren't being as well supported as many would like, the money is being used really to buy people things and better lives. They've gone from this terrible, terrible time in the Great Depression, and now with money, people want this beautiful life, as you can see in this painting here, in suburbia. People are moving out of the cities, especially young white families that have now these children. Many children, millions of children are being born, and they want to raise them in a wholesome, safe environment. And that's where we have these suburbs arising. And in many cases, they look like this. You have homes after homes after homes with this nice lawn in front and long sidewalks along the way for families to move to. So it becomes this American dream of a white picket fence and a yard out front. With the money, they're also buying consumer products. Televisions start becoming affordable for families. So you have not only televisions in the homes, but also television culture. People start watching TV shows. Teenagers are spurring a lot of this growth. As I said, we have this baby boom, so we have a lot of children, millions of children, and consumers or producers of goods want to appeal to kids. So you have things like jukeboxes and hanging out in places where you can drive your car. So you have kids with cars and convertibles. They go hang out at a diner where you get milkshakes and go out to drive-in movie theaters with cool 3D graphics. So these teenagers, it's the first time people have really recognized teenagers as a part of society. It used to be, all right, you are a student and then you're an adult. And for the first time, really, this new category of people arises, and they're teens. And teens have all these different new ideas and desires, and they're now seen as a part of society that are going to be marketed to. That these teens have money, and they can spend it. So people want them to do that. And one of the big areas with money and combining that and television is music. There's these nationally televised dances of television crews going into schools and televising dances and dance competitions with live bands playing. And a lot of that music, well, it's this new form of music called rock and roll. And the students certainly are going to school, as well as dancing, shockingly enough. And the education, there's a lot of, well, there's more focus getting put on education. And the amount of illiterate people in the country is growing down dramatically. However, as you can see, and we'll get into a bit more next week with the Civil Rights Movement, white education is certainly better than especially African Americans. However, the education, you have these growth of especially science and technology, of classrooms getting better supplies, especially a lot of focus on this. While we're glad not to have 38 students in our classroom, this is actually a nearby school in Massachusetts. And education is really improving in the United States, even though sometimes teachers aren't the nicest. However, education comes under a lot of criticism, and this is the last thing for today. It comes under a lot of criticism after something known as Sputnik. and the Soviet Union launches a rocket, and on that lovely rocket, we have in 1959, a little satellite, and the name of that satellite is Sputnik, and it's not very large. It's a couple times larger than your head, but it's the first artificial object ever put into space. And especially American education system comes under fire of, why didn't we send something into space first? The Soviets are going to start bombing us from space, which is a great fear of many.